Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Well, hi, everybody. It's Steve Martirano with you on the Behavioral Corner. That's where we hang, hoping to run into interesting people who can inform and sometimes even just entertain us with everything and anything that has to do with what we call behavioral health. The Behavioral Corner is underwritten by our great partners in this endeavor, Retreat Behavioral Health. I'm going to talk a little bit about them straight ahead because nothing happens without their support. They are just terrific. But anyway, this was launched 6-7 months ago now, so we're going to talk a lot about that. And what this is not, though, is not a year-end review. And I'll tell you why. Well, I don't have to tell you why it's not a year-end review, because who the hell wants to look back at 2020 in any, specific sense? The other day somebody said, yeah, it began with Kobe Bryant dying. And I went, oh my God, I've forgotten all about that. So no, it's not that, but it is a year end. We wanted to spend the last podcast of the passing year just to bring you up to date and up to speed on what we tried to set out to do with this thing, how well we're doing and what we want to do going forward. And I could do that by myself, but I'm no dope. It's easier when you bring somebody in, particularly when someone is very important to the project. Paul Altobelli is our producer. He is my distributor. He is my social media guy. He does all that stuff for me. And briefly about Paul, I've known Paul a very long time. I've known him as long as he's been alive. Without getting into too many details, our families are very, very close. We've worked together in the past. He has a great background. He has all the necessary skills to do a podcast for us, and he brings to it also great enthusiasm and curiosity, which is important. Paul is going to join us on this edition of The Corner. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Steve, or as I used to call you, Big Steve.
Big Steve, yes. Well, you can still do that occasionally. Here's the deal, and this is in the interest of complete disclosure. Over the years, he's always had a real job, and I've always had a sort of real job. Whenever we could do something together, we would do that. And we've done that only a couple of times, really. Two notable times. This project, of course, which is our latest, and one that preceded this by about 15 years, maybe even longer now. And that was we put the Village Voice, the venerable Village Voice alternative newspaper, we put that on the internet as an audio product. We did that in terms of the history of the internet and all of that. We did that 15 minutes after it was possible to do. We were very much ahead of the curve with the voice radio, and Paul was, again, instrumental in getting that, the tech and lots of the creative stuff in order so we could do it. But it is important to note, he and I have come to work together, and I don't want to blame for any of this, but the truth of the matter is, the world went to hell in a handbasket. 9/11, we were in New York. He tried to get to New York City that day. I was in New York City for the 9/11 attacks as we were trying to get our radio station running for The Voice. And then when we start doing this, bang, COVID. Not for nothing, but we got to be careful what we do, Paul.
I think I'm worried about what our next venture.
Yeah. Well, I think we used up all that weird karma. Anyway, as I said, we're going to talk about what we did this year, what we want to do going forward. Here's the deal with behavioral health. It covers a broad range of practices and disciplines and ailments. I mean, behavioral health in a simple way is how our behavior affects our mental, spiritual, and physical health. So it's a very big topic. And Retreat, which began when I began partnering up with them as strictly a substance abuse treatment place, and one of the better ones in the country, I might add, has expanded over the years to include now all those other things, the mental health side of the issue in a behavioral health context. And so that's why we have a pretty broad purview. Paul came into it. I told him what I needed done. We were going to change it from a terrestrial product to a podcast because that seemed to be the future, and it is. And so he has been there to help us create the podcast that now comes to you as the Behavioral Corner. So, Paul, take a minute or two and give me the state of the podcast. We began with nothing. Take us from that day in June of this year to where we are now.
we started with trying to figure out how do we actually put it on the air, quotes. Didn't even know how to do that. We figured it out. To this day, we are at 30 episodes in for our first season. We have over 2,000 listeners. We're featured on over 30 podcast apps, including Apple, Google, Spotify, Pandora, Overcast, which, for those who are in the podcast game, getting noticed by these apps, I feel that's a major accomplishment. The more these apps are familiar with the Behavioral Corner, the more people can listen to us. Outside of the United States, the Behavioral Corner is heard all around the world. We have listeners in France, Ireland, Guam, Israel, India, UK, South America, and Australia. So we're on all seven continents.
Name the 7 continents, Paul. Go ahead.
Europe, North America, South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, and I always forget the last one. Asia. How did I forget Asia?
Yeah, you buried the lead. It's amazing. Here's what I've learned. I have a fairly long background in broadcasting, radio and television, primarily radio. And I understand radio and how it works fairly well. It's a very strange beast. A radio program is here in the moment and gone. That's just the nature. Television the same way, except certainly you can record stuff, but nevertheless, when it's being done, it's in the moment and then it's gone. Podcasting is more permanent. Can be more permanent. It's like building a library. Paul and I talk about this all the time. It's like putting episodes on a shelf. They stay there. If you like the podcast in general, you can go back, listen to an old show. But there are 800,000 or 900,000 podcasts, at least, if not more. And so the game becomes immediately how do you crack through the noise? And I didn't know how. That's where Paul comes in, because he has a specialty in what's called search engine optimization. People go looking for you. You got to make it easy for them to find you. And the learning curve on this thing has been pretty steep for me. I'm still not up to speed on everything, but it's plainly obvious that there's at least 2 ways to do this. One is bring to bear all of the techniques that are inherent in social media and the internet to build that. And believe me, there are dozens of things you've got to know about how to get a podcast listened to, that if you don't know, you're wasting your time. The second way, and I always go back to this, is to figure out a way to get Michelle Obama and her husband to come on one of your shows. And then you have short-circuited the whole system. You've gone right to the front of the line, and then all you have to do is keep working at it. So it's about attracting attention. It's about, we want to build a product that doesn't have to rely on getting, a monster guest, although if you're listening, please come on. We want to build something that people go, I'd like to know more about that topic. Let's see what the Behavioral Corner has about that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So over the course of that time, we've touched upon a lot of stuff. So we're building. That's what we're doing. We're
process,
building.
not an event. Yep.
Paul's a great example of whether this is succeeding or not on a certain level, because his responsibility is not only the manufacturing of this product, but he listens to it naturally, obviously. And he has no background in behavioral health or substance abuse or treatment or any of that. So he's been a kind of fresh set of ears, and I've been doing this for over 10 years now. I'm going to ask you, Paul, what did you think these shows are going to be like, and what has surprised you about the topics?
I had a general idea that substance abuse, if I start there, was a choice. It was something that I chose to do this, that I can stop. Like I know about alcoholics, and you hear about stories of people that are addicted to drugs, but you always think in the back of your mind, well, if you want to stop, if you don't want to do it anymore, you just stop.
You stop, sure.
And the disease part of it was something that I never really understood completely until we started hearing from people like Will Erdman or Rodney Thorne or Joy Horner or Sarah Thompson. These are Vito Baldini, my favorite episode, where these people were in the grips of addiction, to where everything was thrown away. They lost everything. They lost their homes, their cars, their money, their children, their jobs. And then, they get this moment of clarity. And I always like that part of the story where it's almost like the heavens open up and they hear the angels sing and they realize I can do this. But that's the second thing that I've learned too, Steve, is that very rarely can people do it by themselves, and that through organizations like Retreat Behavioral Health and Alcoholics Anonymous and through community, that's a theme we've heard over and over and over again.
Yeah.
This idea of talking to others, to working it through. You're not alone. That you can get over this disease. You can get over this. Let me rephrase that. You can cope to manage the disease, because I don't think you ever really fully.
So it worked on you the way it's, the field has always hoped that it would work, and it's been a long, long process, and they finally arrived at it. That is getting, with regard to substance abuse, especially, to convince the public. We're not talking about character flaws here. We're talking about disease. This is a disease over which you have no control. They use some of the analogies you will hear endlessly is that it's diabetes. It's a disease that you can manage and live with. Certainly, you have to take some responsibility with diabetes. You have to take your medicine, and you have to eat properly. Well, much can be said the same for substance abuse. But getting people to appreciate that what's going on in front of them was people wreck their lives, destroy their families, go to jail, and ultimately some of them die. It's because they cannot control themselves. And those people need help. There are people who can just stop, but there is a large number who cannot. But over the years, I've learned that in spite of all that, there are millions of people in long-term successful sobriety. So, that's terrific. One of the things that is another casualty of 2020 is that, the last couple of years prior to this year, the opioid epidemic had finally bubbled up into mainstream consciousness because, there it was in suburbia. Mm-hmm. So suddenly that group's going to start paying attention. And then it was a genuine, bona fide epidemic of overdose deaths. Yeah. Stunning numbers. Every year, more and more, surpassing automobile accidents. Think about that. Yeah. And so at the moment when the public had stopped thinking about this as a criminal justice issue and started talking about it as a crisis of a health issue, COVID comes along and pushes it right out of the consciousness of everybody for obvious reasons. And the further irony is that we know people addicted are even more profoundly at risk to relapse during the pandemic. So it's been, again, just a mess. 2020 and this pandemic. I've told you many of the stories I've heard over the years, stuff that you can't imagine, Yeah. People would do. We've had people on who are unbelievable testaments to getting it together. I think specifically of two colleagues from Retreat. I mean, Maggie Hunt and Grace Schober are just unbelievably successful career women, moms, wives, great people, and sober for many, many years. And they did that themselves. They really did get a lot of help, but they did it themselves.
I like how a lot of these folks, too, that not only have they sought help and have cleaned up their lives, they're taking what they've learned and they're helping others.
Oh, yeah.
That's such a special thing.
That's an interesting phenomenon. I think some people don't understand that. I know I didn't fully understand that because while it used to be more and more common that people working in the field of substance abuse were recovering substance abusers, there's still a lot of that, but it's not overwhelmingly who they are anymore. But I used to think, well, what's that all about? Is that just them continuing their treatment by doing this and that helps them? There's some of that, I'm sure, but I think I've seen it in people's stories and the way they talk about it. I think when you come back from the brink of something as devastating as, say, heroin addiction, really come back from it, get your life back together, the power of that transformation is so strong in you that when you look back on what you did and then see others still doing it, you are compelled to try to help them. It's so powerful to say, I can't just sit around and let people do what I used to do and not realize they can stop doing it. So you get a lot of people motivated that way. You mentioned a couple of your favorite interviews. Vito Baldini is an amazing guy. As Paul said, he's a minister at a church in Philadelphia. He has as bad a story as anybody. And then he starts a food bank. Actually, he just starts feeding people.
Yeah.
Our buddy Daryl Hitton did the same thing in the Norristown area. Just $30 in his pocket and said, I think I'll go buy some pizzas, feed some homeless people in Kensington. He has a very robust nonprofit doing lots of good things called Feed One, Teach One, Feed One. And Vito has Small Things, which is gigantic now.
Yeah.
Have you seen the growth of that in the 3 or 4 months since I like to take responsibility for that, but it's been Vito. He's a distributor now. He handles tons of food for lots of nonprofits. And that came out of his addiction, so that's great. Now, again, we launched this thing under the banner of behavioral health, set against the backdrop of an epidemic. So naturally, all those mental health things like anxiety and depression, all of that are exacerbated by the pandemic. So we've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people about how to deal with that stuff, because, if you think all those other things are prevalent, consider depression and anxiety. Plenty of that going on. We can't not talk about the pandemic in this context. What about the pandemic, besides the scariness of it, were you most surprised about, or what you still look at and can't believe?
They didn't say, oh, there's a pandemic, so we have to stop. They figured it out, and they had to figure it out quickly. And that seems to be a recurring theme with, was it John White?
From the consortium, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about how, he's got these clinics all over Philadelphia where people go to seek help. And then he said we had a weekend to figure out, how do we continue this? How do we move this along through technology, through telehealth? You recently spoke with the gentleman that had the gambling addiction, and how they had to figure out, how do we keep our meetings going in the face of this when we can't get together anymore, and we're going to do it through telehealth. And he says that they have daily meetings now online with people all over the world, hundreds of people that are participating. So I don't know if technology was something that we always knew it was going to happen, but the pandemic has sort of moved it along a lot quicker than anyone ever believed. And now we're able to use technology and the internet and video conferencing, teleconferencing, in a way that's helping even more people now.
Again, like everything else, that the ironies abound, just at a moment when particularly parents were beginning to rise up against this notion of screen time. Along comes this event that causes us to withdraw from each other, but still have to connect some way. Bang, your kid's in front of a screen 3 or 4 hours a day now, trying to get an education. So interestingly enough, the pandemic may have saved the internet from the road it was heading down in the minds of most people as a net bad thing, to something that's very, very useful. I think for me, the thing that completely continues to blow my mind about the pandemic is that nobody was prepared for this, not at any level of officialdom. Now, I know, without this thing becoming political, we know there was very little top down, but nobody was ready. Hollywood, for instance, has been telling us for years with their goofy movies about, epidemics was going to happen. And really smart people have been writing papers about saying we've got to get ready for global pandemics, the spread of diseases. We've seen them before. We've seen SARS before, seen Ebola. It was inevitable, and nobody was ready. Nobody. And it constantly annoys me that we have spent, I can't even put a number on it, building weapons to protect us against China or Russia, and very little on getting ready for something like this. And, it's been devastating. And we're playing catch up, and we're still playing catch up.
There was an episode of Netflix before this hit about what would happen if there was a pandemic. And it's 4 or 5 episodes long. And they've known this, and they know here are the issues that we could be facing. Lack of PPE, the speed in which we can get a vaccine. hospital space, ventilators. They knew all this was going to happen.
Everything. I'm not one who loves to see government after the fact feel the need to have a commission. Let's have a commission and find out what happened. This calls for it. Once we get this thing under control and go back to something that approaches normal and people stop dying, they've got to impanel people to study how this happened, that we were unprepared, and why it should never happen again, because it's been outrageous, just outrageous. But that's the thing that completely blew my mind. You have teenagers at home.
I do.
There's a lot of talk about the kids. Whenever I hear people go, what about the kids? I think of George Carlin. George Carlin used to go, F the kids, who cares? Don't give me that kids crap. I have some sympathy for that answer, but it's not easy to be in a cloistered situation in lockdown, particularly with teenagers. How are your guy? You got two great sons. How are they holding up?
They're doing okay. The one son he just kind of picked up where he left off when he was in class. The other son's struggling a little bit. Maybe struggling isn't the right word. He's figured it out where he can do the least amount of work because he's not being called out on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's instances when I can go up there where he might have class on one screen and then he's got YouTube on another.
Really?
Yeah. So he's getting away with things that, and his grades are showing it. He's somebody that needs to be in class.
That's the only thing I am convinced of. And the other thing that's driving us all crazy is that if you want an opinion that suits you, just look for it. It's out there. So you never know what to believe, right? And I'm the same way, except for this issue of the schools. I'm now convinced from the medical and scientific community, and certainly from the practical economic side of the equation, that it's critical to get the kids back to school.
Yeah.
For their socialization and their education, for sure. But more than that, our society, this society, most societies cannot function if the kids aren't in school because people got to work.
Right.
Parents got to go to work. So that's a major, major piece that I'm glad to see we're moving towards, because most kids are now getting at least some kind of in-school education. But maybe in the new year they can get them back in, protect the staff. Kids seem pretty safe, and get people working again. And in the meantime, the stuff we'll be working on for the podcast, and it's something that thoughts occur to us at random, will be impacted by all of that. I just want to sort of sum up, Paul, to let people know, first of all, how grateful we are. This is something Paul hammers me on all the time. You got to tell them. You got to tell them to follow us. You got to tell them. I go, what do you mean in a cab? What do you got to tell people to like us? And I go, yeah, I don't care if people like me. As long as no, they got to like it. All those platforms, any platform you can imagine, we're on it. And in the most cases on those platforms, there are ways of acknowledging that. If Facebook and lots of other places are more obvious, you can like something.
Mm-hmm.
So give people who might not know, like me, a hierarchy in order of things we would like them to do. They find the corner.
Yes.
What should they like it first, or should they subscribe first, or should they? What should they do?
In order, what I would like them to do is like and follow. There's usually a button that says follow or subscribe to this podcast. So that would be helpful, because, Apple, for instance, is going to look at that. And they're going to say, all right, if somebody types in behavioral health into their search engine, it's only going to bring up so many episodes, right? You were talking about 900,000. There's a piece of that have to do with what we talk about. Mm-hmm. So they're only going to feature episodes that people are engaged with. We have solid content. And I feel that if Apple were to give us a little extra promotion, display our show more than others, then we have a shot of growing our audience. So, secondly, if you have a couple minutes, leave a review. That's a very solid thing that you could do for our show as well. Love the podcast. That's all it's got to be. 3 words. Love the podcast. 5 stars. That helps a lot. But what we have learned, and another thing, Steve, that I thought has been fantastic, is when somebody shares our podcast, that they listen to the show and then they go on Facebook and go, I listened to this podcast today, and I think there's a lot of value here. Please check it out yourself. and we see our numbers increase. We see a lot of people listening to the show. Those are the three things that I would recommend somebody does when they listen.
Yeah, and they're easy. They're clicks of a button. The review thing is interesting. I wasn't even aware that you could do that. I would say, as the content producer here, that I don't know where the next good idea is coming from for a show. So if you have an idea, please, here's what's going on in my life, or here's what's going on in my community. And by the way, I'm too senior to have very thin skin. If there's stuff you don't like, tell me about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the reviews would be just fantastic. I just want to say this going forward, so I give you an idea. A couple of things in the new year that I want to get to right away. We're going to spend some time talking about nutrition and how we eat and what effect that has on our behavioral health, mental well-being. I see nothing but ads this time of the year for these supplements that are supposed to do everything from, everything, cure everything. Well, I spent a couple of hours the other day trying to find out what was in the supplements, and nowhere do they tell you what's in the supplements. So, and many times these are multi-level marketing operations. So I want to do something on that. I'm in the process of getting somebody authoritative to talk about it. And I guarantee you we're going to do something on a field of study called neuropsychology and neuropsychiatry. And that has to do with brain activity. And if you have traumatic brain injury, they'll naturally do a brain scan of you because that's an organic thing. But this is an emerging field where they claim they can look at a brain scan and kind of predict why you're behaving the way you're behaving. It's very experimental, and it's very controversial because a lot of people go, please, I can light your brain up on a brain scan for a number of reasons. It doesn't mean that it will follow that you will behave this way. It's very fascinating. And I'm going to get somebody really good to come on and talk about that.
But if I may add too, I just recently did my DNA with Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
And not only are they telling me, who's my fifth cousin and all that other fun stuff, but they're also telling me, because of my genetic makeup, what I am prone to do behavior-wise. Through DNA, am I left-handed or right-handed? If how many cups of coffee I drink a day? If I like comedy more than drama? If I'm athletic or if I'm not athletic. This is all done through DNA.
Who'd you use? Ancestry?
Ancestry.com. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. That's another, sort of the neurobiology thing, but it's bigger than that. That would be another thing I'd like to look at because, my default position is when I hear about stuff like this, my just knee-jerk reaction is, give me a break.
Yeah.
Okay? Let's say, really? Seriously? But we'll get some people on and talk about it because there's a lot to know. And, in closing, with regard to the pandemic in 2020, one of the things that has been, and we'll know more down the road, of course, remarkable is that in spite of the fact I play a curmudgeon and a cynic in my life, I'm the biggest optimist alive. I wake up every day thinking we got a shot at having a better day. I don't act like it, but that's what I believe. And I have thought for a long time that this pandemic was so serious and there were so many really smart sons of bitches. They were going to come up with something. And that they came up with these vaccines this quickly is flat out a miracle. Yeah. It's an embarrassing one because it demonstrates once again that things shouldn't be anywhere near as fucked up as they are, since we can fix things if we got to.
Yeah.
And they appear to have done that with this vaccine. This show is also in a small way about that. Things may be bad. You may be depressed. You may be anxious. You may be addicted. There's a way out of that. There is a way out of that. That's what the Behavioral Corner is about. The conceit is that we're hanging because that's the tone, just like this. I want to thank Paul. Couldn't do it without Paul.
Thank you.
He's responsible for the 9/11 and the COVID thing. The connection there. And we look forward to putting more of these together. Paul, have a happy new year. Look for us on the Behavioral Corner. Follow us, like us, review us. Thanks, Paul.
And share us.
And share us. Absolutely.
Studies show that 2020 has negatively affected the mental health of millions of Americans. That is why at Retreat, we work to provide comprehensive mental health programming through our Synergy Health programs. To learn more about Synergy and the comprehensive mental and behavioral health services we offer, Call us today at 855-802-6600.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.